Hey everyone, it's Brandy and welcome back to my channel. Today I am going to be doing my October wrap up. I wanted to do this or have this video up last Friday, but I didn't get the time to film when I wanted to, and it ended up not working out. So I'm here to bring this to you guys today. So before I get into the majority of the books that I finished throughout October, I do want to briefly mention the books that I read for the Get Graphic Readathon. These aren't the first books that I read in October, but I do have a separate video about these, so I figured I would just talk about those and link you guys to that video if you want to hear more about my thoughts on these. But these are the 4 things that I read during the Get Graphic Readathon. So the first one that I finished was Death Note Volume 1 of the Black Editions by Sugumi Oba. And this was actually a reread for me. If you guys haven't heard already, this book follows Light Yagami. He is like this ace student, and one day he finds this notebook that has the title Death Note on it, and he quickly finds out that if he writes any names down in the notebook that he picked up, then anyone will die. And if he doesn't specify how they're going to die, then they die of a heart attack. And he vows to use this death note in order to get of all evil in the world. And the story kind of takes off from there, and that's like just the beginning of the storyline. And like I said, this was a reread for me, and upon this reread I decided to give this volume a 4 out of 5 stars. And the next one that I picked up was Neck and Neck Volume 1 by Lee Sun-hee. This one follows Dabin Chow, and she is the daughter of a really powerful crime boss in Seoul, and she is the only child of her father, so she's really kind of spoiled. And basically this follows her story as she is in love with one of the guys that she grew up with. He's basically connected to her family because his father is somehow working with her father. So she grew up with him, and she's been in love with him for a while, and she decides at the beginning of the story that she wants to transfer from the private school that she's going to attend the same school as the guy whose name is Eugene, I believe. She decides to transfer to his school in order to try to work herself into his life and make him fall in love with her. And that's pretty much where the story takes off. I ended up enjoying this one way more than I was expecting. This is another one I gave 4 out of 5 stars, and I'm looking forward to continuing on with this series. And then the last 2 that I read for the Get Graphic Readathon, which I technically finished these after the readathon was already over, but I decided to count them in that video anyway, and that was Descender Volume 3 Singularities and Descender Volume 4 Orbital Mechanics by Jeff Lemire. And I'm not really going to get into these because these are the 3rd and 4th volume in a series, and it really delves more into the story, as you can expect with later volumes in the series. This is one of my favorite sci-fi comedy series that I have ever read. I haven't read a whole lot, but this one is really good, and I actually gave both of these volumes 4 out of 5 stars. So moving on, I'm now going to talk about the rest of the books that I read throughout the month. The majority of these books are ebooks, and I got them for review. I think this is the most books that I've had for review in a month, and I kind of was burning myself out, but I have them done now. And yeah, let's just get into it. So the first book that I finished in the month was Mine for the Week by Erica Kelly, and this was the second book in the Wild Love series. And this book follows Ryan O'Donnell and Sophie Valentine, I believe that's their names. Ryan is actually a collegiate baseball player, and at the very beginning of the story we're following him as he's nearing the end of his college career, and he has scouts coming to see him to see about drafting him professionally, and he's basically screwing it all up which yikes. But yeah, so that's kind of how we get introduced to him. But then his friends kind of save him from this moment, and they take him to this singles resort type of thing for a spring break vacation. And that's kind of where the story takes off. He ends up meeting the other main characters, Sophie Valentine, there, and they meet in some unusual circumstances, but they end up starting to have feelings for each other, and they don't know if this is just, you know, something to have while they're at this singles resort, or if this could be something more. So this is kind of a weird situation just because this book has definite insta love. The majority of the story only takes place over 1 week, and I know most people don't really like insta love, but I don't completely hate it if it's done the right way. And in this story, I didn't completely hate it. Like, I thought that it was a good use of insta love. I felt like the characters really got to know each other pretty well for only having been together for the week that they were together, and I just thought it was really interesting. There were some things that I didn't necessarily enjoy about the story, but for the most part I did like it, and I ended up giving this one a 3.5 out of 5 stars. Like I mentioned, a good chunk of these I did give for a review, so this is one of those books that I did give for a review. So I do have a written review which I have on my blog, so I will make sure to leave a link down to my blog post for this book so you guys can check out more of my thoughts if you are interested in that. The next book that I finished was Holiday Spice by Samantha Chase, and this is the 6th book in the Saucony Brothers series. I believe that's how you say it. This one follows the younger sister of the family, and she ends up going out to Washington to help out one of her brother's wives. She gets a call from someone she had worked with before, and he needs help with a book that he's working on in order to like help with getting him a bit publicity about what he does. He is a sculptor, I believe, and he ends up somehow agreeing to write a book to kind of get his work out there more. So Darcy ends up coming to Washington to help him work on this book. So that's how the two of them end up meeting, but while there she ends up getting snowed into Washington. So this was kind of a weird situation for me going into it, because I didn't know until I was about to start reading the book that this was the 6th book in the series. And with this series, it's one of those that's like a standalone series, so you can read each separately without having read the others. But I felt like I was missing a big part of the story, because with Darcy, her family is a really big thing in her life. That's like a really important thing, part of her life. And you know, they were spouting out all these characters, but I didn't know any of them. I didn't have any background with any of them, so I was kind of lost, and honestly I was confused half the time, or the majority of the time, whenever her family came up, which was a lot, because you know, they was just like this brother and this wife, and I was just like, I have no idea who any of them are, and I was kind of trying to keep up as I was going along, but it wasn't really the best situation. So that part kind of took away some of the enjoyment for me, which is not necessarily the book's fault. I just didn't know beforehand, so I probably wouldn't have requested this one if I knew that this was so far in the series. But yeah, that was a big part of it. So if you guys are interested in this, I wouldn't say that it's necessary to read the other books before, but I think it would help you if you care about understanding the characters and stuff like that. Okay, I feel terrible saying this, but it's probably going to be like this for quite a few of the books, but I finished this one like within the first 7 days, so I don't really remember too many of my opinions of the book. So if I just skip past some of them and just say check out my review, sorry, I just don't want to give you guys something that I don't really remember. But yeah, I gave this one a 3.5 out of 5 stars. This is another one that I do have a written review up for, so I will link that down in the description if you guys are interested in checking that one out. The next book that I finished was Sweet Time by Nina Lane, and this was the 4th book in the Sugar Rush series. I was having some issues because when the things come up in my where I was requesting these from, it doesn't say that it is a certain number in a series, or I wasn't paying attention to that, so I just picked it up anyway. But this one wasn't as bad as some of the other ones. So this book follows Mia Donovan, and she is currently working this boring insurance job that she really doesn't want to, but she has to help pay the bills. And this also follows Gavin Knight, and he owns his own security company, and his company actually services the candy company that's pretty much where the most of the male lead characters from the series have come from. Mia has been basically flirting with Gavin for the past year, and he hasn't been showing her any type of attention, but at the beginning of this book, he finally decides to just go ahead and give in and see where this relationship takes him. And I really enjoyed this. This is one of my favorite like romance books that I've read this month. This was more of the type of thing that I like to read, just because the two characters at the beginning, they have their own issues, and they both needed to work on those things separately in order to come together, and they did. And not saying that everything was completely perfect by the end of the book, because I don't think they were, but it was obvious to see that the two of them were doing what they needed to do and trying to work on the parts of themselves that they needed to in order to be able to successfully have a relationship with each other. And I really appreciated that. I ended up giving this one a 4 out of 5 stars. I really enjoyed it. There were some things that I didn't necessarily think, and I don't think I mentioned it in my review, but there was a part where I felt like Gavin gave me an idea of something that she could do on her own that didn't have to, so she could get out of this insurance job that she didn't like. And I appreciated that he helped her realize where, something that she could do that she loved. But I didn't like the fact that it seemed like she needed his approval and him saying yes, you can do this, or in order for her to actually go and try to do it. I gave this one, like I said, a 4 out of 5 stars. I do have a written review for this one as well, so I'll have that link down below with a whole bunch of other links for you guys to check out if you're interested. The next book that I finished was Bad for Her by Christy Barth, and this is the first book in a new series. This book actually starts out following 3 brothers, and they are in witness protection. They are actually being up and moved from one location into the next at the very beginning of the story. The 2 oldest brothers were part of a mob in Chicago, so that is part of the reason why they are in witness protection, because they decided that they were going to testify against this mob. So they kind of just uproot the family, and they have moved to several different locations, and they're kind of told that this last spot that they're being moved to is their last chance. And after that, that's kind of the end of being in witness protection, and they're gonna have to just figure it out on their own. And they end up getting moved to this small town in Oregon, where the oldest brother, Rafe, I think is his name, or that's like the name he's using in witness protection at this location. He ends up meeting Molly Vickers, and she is a doctor in the small town. She was born and raised in the small town, and she decided to move back there after completing medical school. He meets her on the side of the road one day, and like I've said, for the majority of these books, the story kind of takes off from there. So by the time I got to this one, I had been reading a lot of contemporary romance stories. I felt like although the majority of them had different concepts, they were starting to all seem the same, and I was getting a little burnt out on contemporary romance novels. But I had already agreed to obviously read and review this one, so I had to do that. But I ended up giving this one a 3.5 out of 5 stars. It was another one. I enjoyed it. It was a little better than average, but it wasn't necessarily the best thing that I have ever read. It wasn't completely unique. I think my biggest issue came with, because I am from Chicago, and I know I don't know everything about Chicago, but I hate when people write about it and they use these stereotypes. I feel terrible saying this, but I don't remember a whole lot about it. And that's probably not the best thing to say, because that means that the story just wasn't that memorable. Anyway, I gave this one a 3.5 out of 5 stars. Like I mentioned, for all the other books that I just talked about, I have a written review for this one as well, so that will be linked down in the description. The next book that I finished was Hangry by Lily Kate, and the tagline for this one is that, or at least the one that I kept seeing around, was, "I sold my soul for a hamburger and I don't regret it." I'm just gonna start by saying this book was nothing like I was expecting it to be. So basically, going into this, what I knew about this was that the main character, whose name is Lexi, she got trapped into an elevator with this guy who was her friend, her brother's best friend, and she ended up agreeing to go on a date with him because he had a burger and they were stuck in an elevator and she was hungry. And I went into this thinking that it was going to be a romantic comedy, and it wasn't necessarily, to me at least. Like, there were maybe a few points I might have chuckled at, but it wasn't funny like I was expecting it to be. I wouldn't suggest you guys to read the description of this one because I read it several times before I actually started this book. And I felt like the description of the book were two things. One, I felt like it was too revealing, and two, I felt like it was misleading. There were some things that happened in the book that were actually mentioned in the synopsis of the book, and I was just like, why would you put that in there? Because I'm like, you're giving away the story. And while I was reading, I felt like the description gave an outline of the book. So I was just like, I wasn't surprised by things that would happen. I was kind of just waiting on them to happen. And then it was misleading because some of the things that they said were going to happen didn't happen the way that the description said it was going to happen. So I'm sitting there looking down on the male character who was Bradley, and like, I'm sitting there like, he's going to be a completely terrible person, but it ended up not being the way that it made it out to seem like it was going to be. I did find myself rooting for the characters and hoping that they would work out their issues so they could end up being happy together. It was just some things that I was just like, you know what, no. I kind of did a mini review on this one. I didn't write too much about it just because I didn't really have too much to say because I just wasn't all that happy. I ended up giving this one a 2.5 out of 5 stars. And then I finished 2 other books that I had wanted to read for the month that I didn't have any obligations to read, so that was nice. So the next one was An Enchantment of Raymonds by Margaret Rogerson. And I'm sure you guys have seen this book kind of floating around BookTube lately. But this one follows Isabel, and she is actually a painter. She is living in this world called Whimsy, and she paints portraits of fairy, or the fairy folk of this world. And basically all the fairy folk come to humans for craft, or what they call the craft, and it's basically like food, paintings, clothing, anything. They can't make it themselves because if they do, then they're literally going to die. So they depend on humans to get all the craft. And Isabel is a really known portrait painter, so that a lot of people come to her, and she ends up getting her first royal client. The Autumn Prince ends up coming to her to get his portrait painted. But when she does that, she ends up painting human sorrow in his eyes, which is a really big mistake. A lot of people says that this sounds like the A Court of Thorns and Roses series by Sarah J. Maas. And the initial storyline sounds like it, but I can promise that this is definitely not like that once you actually get into it. I feel like the fairies in here are a lot darker, and this world, if you really sit and think about it, is kind of creepy and really scary. It was pretty good. I do have some mixed opinions about this one because there are some things that I just didn't necessarily like the way it was done, and I felt like this book was way too short. It's only 300 pages, and that's including the acknowledgments, and I felt like it made the issues that were happening resolve too fast, and you didn't really have enough time to have complete character development. And there's just a lot of things that could have been developed more, and you could have spent more time doing this. And the world is so big, and we only see just a tiny bit of, like, a really small amount of it. It's just so many things that could be explored, and it just worked. So I'm like on the fence with this. I felt like even the ending wasn't completely satisfying for me. I enjoyed it, but like I said, I was disappointed because there were some things that I'm just like, I need more. I need more. I need more. What's gonna happen? What happens after this? And the last book that I finished in October was Harry Potter and the Chamber of Secrets by J.K. Rowling. I finally am continuing on with the series. I finally picked up the next book. It only took me like a year after I read the first one to finally pick it up, and then this still took me, I feel like it took me forever to read this, and I think mainly because I was following along with the story, with the movie storyline, but the movie kind of cuts out quite a bit. But anyway, ended up really enjoying this. I liked it way more than I thought I would. I ended up giving this one a 4.5 out of 5 stars, and I cannot wait to continue on with the series. So these are all the physical books that I read in October. Let me know what you guys read in October, or if you have a channel, make sure to leave your link to your wrap up down below so I could go and check that out and see what you guys read. And I kind of miss making TBR videos. I think I said that I wasn't going to do any more for the rest of the year, but I think for November and December I want to do them just because I made TBRs for myself anyway. So I figured, why not just go ahead and include it on my channel since I make it for myself anyway. So I think I'm going to do that. So Friday, be looking out for my TBR video. But that's all I have for you guys today. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you guys again in the next one. Bye.